Hey guys, today's podcast and all this week brought to you by Indeed.com. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Indeed.com/standup. Stand up. Yeah, hello and welcome to the show. Welcome to the week if you're listening on Monday, July 25th, 2022. And even if you're not, whatever time of day or week it is, I'm very happy to have you listening to today's episode of Stand Up, where I welcome writer and activist good friend Maura Quint for Maura Mondays. And then I have a very interesting, informative conversation with Dexter Tiff Roberts, who joins me here for the first time. He's an award-winning writer and speaker, and he is the author of The Myth of Chinese Capitalism, The Worker, the Factory, and the Future of the World, a new book out this year. Comes highly recommended from our good friend Pete Coe, who is off gallivanting around Scandinavia, and Dexter Roberts is his brother-in-law. He's been asking me, or telling me, I really should have a conversation with Dexter for a long time now, and we finally sat down and did it, and today you get to hear it. Maura Quint, Dexter Roberts, me, you, the whole thing. I hope you had a good weekend. I hope that you're doing okay wherever you're at. Very happy to have you supporting and listening to this podcast. Constantly thinking about ways to make it more dynamic and include you in it. So email me your thoughts about anything that we can do better, integrate into this daily show, standupwithpete@gmail.com. I'm doing okay. The girls are still away at camp. Val and I here alone, trying to adult. Are you adulting? I like that phrase. People are using that a lot now. Adulting is hard. I had a great conversation about adulting with Maura Quint, letting you in on some of the things that I'm working on about myself, and hopefully giving you permission to treat your life as a work in progress, with the acknowledgement that life is a pursuit of constant growth. And maybe you disagree, but that's how I see it, how I'm trying to treat it, and hopefully I'm having some success at it. I'm feeling good about my daily practice, my meditation, reading, and writing, and realizing that I have to do it pretty much every day to stay on course and remind myself about the things that I want to change, and that I'm not in control of the things that I can't. Did I just say the AA Serenity Prayer by accident? I don't know. I like it. It's pretty good. Not in AA, that's not the issue, but I do like some of their techniques. Oh, and speaking of mental health, I thought I would share this with you. After his victory at a fight, UFC fight in London this weekend, an Irishman named Paddy Pimblett, known to his fans as Paddy the Batty, opened up about his death of his friend Ricky. He received the news just one day before he started this fight, and with his thick Irish accent in victory after he won the fight, his poignant post-match tribute to his friend who died by trigger alert suicide included this very emotional appeal to men dealing with mental health struggles, and I just thought it was a great message, and probably the type of message that needed to be heard by this type of audience of tough people, tough men, especially, who love fighting. Anyway, I thought it was interesting, and I wanted to share it with you. Here it is, 1 minute long.
But also, I woke up on Friday morning at 4 a.m. to a message that one of my friends back home had killed himself. This was 5 hours before me weigh-in. So Ricky, lad, that's for you. But there's a stigma in this world that men can't talk. Listen, if you're a man and you've got weight on your shoulders and you think the only way you can solve it is by killing yourself, please speak to someone. Speak to anyone. People would rather, I'd rather me mate cry on my shoulder than go to his funeral next week. So please, let's get rid of this stigma and men start talking.
I know I'd rather my mate cry on my shoulder than go to his funeral. Well said, and to an audience that needs to hear it, and maybe you needed to hear it. I just thought that was inspiring, poignant, and of course sad, but Paddy Pimblett, there you go. All right, so let's get to that conversation right now. Coming up, Dexter Roberts, the myth of Chinese capitalism, the worker, the factory, and the future of the world. But first, I always like to have my conversations with Maura Quint on Monday. We talk about life, people, the world, the news, and then we shit on the rich. I think you're going to like it. Appreciate you being here for it. If you don't, come back tomorrow for something new. Here now, my conversation with Maura Quint, who is a huge hit on Twitter. If you're not following her, at Behind Your Back. She's a regular contributor to all kinds of different outlets where she writes hilarious and thought-provoking things. And of course, she is the campaign chair over at Americans for Tax Fairness. And here we go.
Something, right? You should always look back on past versions of yourself and say, wow, fuck that person. I hate them. Time to move on.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
I'm trying to do that right now. And it could be really humiliating and embarrassing to look back and see a moment where you were being a jerk, or in my case, maybe morally superior. Maybe I was being morally superior to somebody that I cared about.
Huh.
And judgmental.
Interesting.
Maybe they were friends hanging out on my deck. Anyway, so you feel, if you see it, you feel, oof, that guy's a dick. Then what do you do?
Then you recognize that you're better now, right? Like you've moved in a positive direction. I think we should, in general, look, I'm not saying everyone is here. I'm saying this is the sort of thing to be trying to reach for. And I think the ideal way to be is to say, I feel comfortable about who I am right now. I recognize areas and opportunities that I would like to change and better. And when I look at past me, I see someone that I no longer am and that I have improved past. And the older versions of myself are things that I'm glad that I have gotten past and I am in a better state then.
Have you had success with this, the idea that you're articulating about growth?
Absolutely. No, past me sucked. God, that chick was awful. I hate her.
How far back are you going?
Well, I mean, there are elements of me 20 years ago was awful.
Joining us now, old Maura, 20-year-old Maura. What does she have to say?
Something really obnoxious, I'm sure. I don't know. The morally superior, that definitely the like generally superior, I think, in a lot of ways, and more insecure at the same time somehow. But I mean, I think I'm a better person now than I was 2 years ago. So, you know, it's also really like smaller chunks of time too. That person was way more confused about what she was doing and where she wanted to go than I am now.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. That's great. Do you give yourself credit for the progress, or do you not stay?
Oh, hell yeah. No. Yeah. This is probably a problem. I'm just like, God, I'm fucking amazed. Look what I did. That's incredible. I am so awesome. That's probably bad. 2 years from now, I'm going to be like, God, she thought so much of herself. What a cunt.
Maybe you won't. Maybe you probably continue to look at different things. I am.
Yeah.
I'll talk about myself. I mean, you know, different ways I want to be in terms of my behavior. Less judgmental, less reactive, less, as I said, morally superior, more curious, more kind. I have actually flirted with the idea, and maybe people will hear this, I hope they don't, of becoming more boring. How about that? As a person.
That's interesting. What do you mean by boring?
I don't know. I guess I don't mean that when I'm on the microphone or when I'm doing something publicly that I know people are
going to join Elon Musk's company? Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, God. No, but I want to ask you about him. But before I do, just the idea that, you know, I don't want to make it sound like it's a big burden, but as someone who talks for a living, who's a comedian, and, you know, you get together with people and there's a certain expectation. And sometimes I fulfill the expectation and sometimes I don't. Preferably at this point, I really don't want to. But at this point, I do when there's a boring group or the conversation's not going in a direction I want it to. That's when I jump in that situation. But even in that situation, I'm so judgmental and I don't want to be. And I don't want to be the center of attention either, if that makes sense at this point.
Don't want to be. Interesting. Okay. Well, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with being the center of attention exactly, but I can understand if that's like a drive in a sort of way where you have to be the center of attention, so you're stepping on everyone else's toes or ignoring sort of what else is happening around you and just kind of inserting yourself. Yeah, that's no good. But like, there are a lot of boring groups. Sometimes you do need to.
Those I'm fine with.
Man.
I mean, but even in that case, I'd rather steer the conversation towards where people have something to offer that I would even be tangentially interested in hearing, if I'm being honest about being selfish with that moment, with that person.
Did you feel that you were like going through life just constantly sort of with the spotlight? Like, okay, I have to perform. I have to perform and entertain this group.
But that's been gone for a while. Like, I've made that realization a long time ago. I'm thinking more about I'm thinking about how I can be with my girls as they enter adolescence, so that I can work on the parts of me that don't work for folks and be their safe harbor. I want to be a person that they feel good to be around, that they want to be around, that they don't feel embarrassed by, intimidated by, unsafe in terms of, how I might react to something. And that's kind of one of my primary focuses right now for them, as they're so independent, Maura, they're just so, and who am I to them now? And I certainly don't want to be intimidating or annoying.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. Intimidating is a tricky one, but I certainly understand reactive, when people feel like nervous because they are not sure where you are, and you might react in sort of an over the top way.
Yeah.
Like, that's something I
do that.
Work on a lot now.
It's
a bad way to be.
Yeah, it's a bad way to be. That's that's going to be the name of my journal or my memoir about the way I've been. And too often, it's a bad way to be.
Yeah. No, that's very fair. No, I mean, that's a hard one to move past and to get over. I've put a lot of work in, although I think I'm doing great.
I'm so happy to hear that. But let me ask you one more question, just about men in general.
And, let me talk about men. Yeah,
I've been learning so much. I feel like I've heard this word narcissist to describe men over the past year or two in ways I never heard it. And I kind of want to be like, what was it called before we had that word? Because I feel like it's maybe doing men and women a disservice, because as I looked into it, I found out there's all kinds of different types of narcissists, and there's different things that make someone a narcissist. But boy, if you paint someone with that word, it does a lot of work. And I think I have elements of it, but I don't think I am it. But I just hear it getting a lot of attention. And I wonder if you have thoughts about the way the word is being used to describe men of a certain maybe age or all ages at this time in our culture.
Well, I think that we always have a tendency to take a hold of like psychological buzzwords, and then we just overuse them or reuse them in ways that they're not necessarily intended. And I think right now, too, there's so much attention on mental health and so much of a desire, I think, to even be able to name what things are, but we don't have all the words for them. And the names are not always, perfect. They're incomplete. And so I think there's a lot of sort of fumbling through that. I think it's mostly well-intended, because I think it's generally like, again, trying to identify and give something a category and understand it better. But it then can kind of spiral out of control. And certainly, you're right, narcissist gets thrown around a lot now. And I do generally hear it towards men. I think I hear it mostly towards like what we told men societally they're supposed to be, right? Like, they're supposed to be confident. They're supposed to be able to walk into a room and sort of command whatever it is, that kind of type A or whatever. And I think narcissist gets put on that a lot of times, which is not necessarily where it belongs. But we sort of see that like, well, you're dominating things, so that because you must only care about you, and you must have to make everything about you, when maybe that's where that's coming from emotionally, but maybe not. So I think it definitely gets misused. I mean, I've wanted to use it. I certainly have an ex that I play around with that a lot, going like, is he a narcissist? I don't think it's fair to say so, but
what you're saying though is what I'm hearing is thinking about young kids who know how they feel, but their vocabulary is too limited to describe those feelings. They don't have the words. And when they get the words, and when an adult gives them the words, or when someone sees them, they feel so relieved. Is true of adults. The difference, however, is we do have a vocabulary, but unfortunately, we might overuse it, and we might use these words to because they seem adequate and appropriate. And the problem with that, there's a problem with it. You tend to then think, oh, well, then this person has all of these qualities, or that's what this says about me, when in fact, there's always going to be a lot of different nuance, and we have to be careful how we write off ourselves and others using this limited vocabulary, especially when it's these buzzwords that you mentioned seem to come with every generation, every few years even.
It's I think that's completely true. And I think it's kind of interesting. I mean, I would only push back on you saying that we as adults have the words. And I don't think we do yet. Like, we have some words, but we don't have an adequate amount of words. We don't have, like, the German language of words, like real, like nuanced, weird little bits that I think we need a lot of times.
I agree. I agree. We have these words, but then what we need is more. We need a lot more of a conversation that has details around the specifics of how you are behaving towards yourself, towards other people, towards people you don't even know. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I fully agree. Yeah, we need a lot more words than just one. He's a blank. She's a this.
It's a lot of times a way to put somebody in a box and then dismiss them, right? Like, minimize. And that's the problem. And additionally, though, I think that when we look at any sort of like mental health categorization, it should all be seen as a spectrum. There's not like, it's not as though there's just this one type of person and that's all that is. Most of these things, like, you can have some of, you can have parts of, you can have bits. Perhaps you have bits right now because of where you are in your life or who you're interacting with or all that sort of thing. I see it a lot too. I've been having this conversation a lot about ADHD, actually, because people really have latched on to ADHD a lot recently. Forever.
Our whole lot, adults, it's like I usually hear people our age saying I have, and then of course now I hear people talking about their kids. And my thing has always been like, I think we all have it. How bad is it? Like, talk to me about how it plays out in his or her life. Go ahead.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say we all have it, but I do think that a lot of us exhibit a lot of qualities that get summarized on that. And so then it's about, well, in what way, how bad exactly? But to this is sort of a slight aside, actually. I was like at some goofy little store and they had, these magnets, and the one had pictures of dogs on it. And it said, "I'm an introvert unless you want to tell me about your dogs." And I just thought it was like, it reminded me of my youngest son. And I took a picture of it and I sent it to my son's father. And I was like, "Oh, this is like our son." And he immediately was like, "Haha, yes, but I would never want to put the label introvert on him because I don't want him to think that about himself. That means something, like, and let him." And I was like, yeah. I was just sending you a picture of a magnet. But I kind of appreciated how quick he was to sort of be like, "Ooh, let's not put any of these words on these children because that's how they'll internalize it, that this is who I am," and they'll sort of make a construct as to what that means and what they're allowed to do and who they're allowed to be. And I appreciated his sensitivity to that. And I think in general, we probably all need to do that a little bit more and kind of back away a little bit from needing so badly to label everything and kind of letting people explore a little bit more who they are and, pick through the various criteria of any particular, diagnosis.
I've been fond of telling the girls their whole lives what I hope they will be. That's how I describe them to other people. And then when they aren't, I tell them how disappointed I am in them for not being what I hope they would be.
Well, what do you hope they are? I mean, that's the real question.
No, like I really did kind of do that. I realized to Julia, I always talk about how Julia walks into a room, she lights it up, she's very confident. She's so great in a conversation. She asks great questions. And we were at the grocery store the other day and we ran into her first grade teacher and she walked over and it was she seemed like the most typically shy person ever. And her old teacher was like begging her to, tell her things. And then when we left and said goodbye, I was like, "Dude, what? You just totally clammed up. Like, where were you on that?" And then I realized she didn't really know what to do in that situation. She didn't know how to be in that situation. We talked about it, and I felt bad for my judgment, of course. But I'm glad we kind of talked about that situation because it was interesting. It wasn't who I kind of talk about how she generally is, because she usually is. But in that one, no, sir.
It is fascinating. I think it's like a real, it can be a real difficult thing, the way that parents sort of see their children and then
the way she is with
that out to them.
Her friends and with adults. I probably should have mentioned that. That's the main difference there. It's the ex-teacher. You know, she is when she walks into a room with her friends, she lights up the room. Walks into a room with adults, she's probably pretty shy and intimidated because she's 14. Sorry to interrupt you again.
No. I think that's totally fair. Did you ever have that? Like, did your parents put any classifications on you that you felt like you were either struggling to be or not be, or
my dad would often,
you?
I think my dad would often, I would overhear him say about me that he's not great.
Really? Okay, because I was fine with that. I was like, oh, wow, okay, that explains a lot.
No, I think that my parents, you know, our parents' generation probably thought a lot less about psychology and parenting. My mom thought a lot about it because she was a school teacher and she worked with special ed. She was at a master's degree, so she certainly thought about it. And I'm sure she led in many ways the behavior and enlightened my dad. But I think they generally told me who they thought I was and encouraged the good qualities in me. So I certainly felt like an outgoing, you know, kid, a funny kid. I knew I was funny, though, you know, so things like that.
They told you that? They like reinforced that?
Well, we all were funny. You know how it is when you're a hilarious person. You don't talk about being funny. Everybody's just like my dad and my brother and I and my mom too, all just constantly making each other laugh and making jokes of all different styles. So we just knew it, I guess.
See, and here's the thing, though. My family's not funny at all.
Why are you funny?
And it's it's a sort of thing I've tried to figure out a little bit. I think, you know, partially it's just being the outcast. Partially it's also just like, it's a game. Like, being funny is kind of a game, and I like playing games. I'm always playing games in my head. So, you know, a lot of it is just trying to like put things together quickly. But then I think a little tiny part, my brother and I both have the same sense of humor, and he and I are the only ones. He's my younger brother, but like my parents, I would remember having conversations at like a dinner table and they just had no idea what we were talking about. Like, they just couldn't even really follow it.
Right.
And I mean, you know, we weren't that close or anything. It would just be like throwaway something, but it was like a secret language, I think, a little bit. My dad, that's interesting. I mean, I don't know where people get it, if anything, if it's not from their parents, good and bad. But I used to wonder where I got it. And I finally realized not too long ago that my dad's a storyteller and they're all bits. I finally realized, I've heard him tell this one to somebody. Oh my God, he knows where the laughs are. Oh my God, he's doing bits. He's doing, you know, he's telling stories, but there's highs and lows. There's laughs. And he's doing voices. And then he says to me, he's that guy. I watched that guy hold court my entire life. And I was like, yeah, I want to do bits. I want to tell stories. Yeah, just put a mic in front of me here.
I remember he told a woman, a neighbor who we knew well for years, nice woman. He just one time told her at a barbecue that he used to be a fighter jet pilot. Just told a whole entire bullshit story. And I watched him. I was like, what's he doing? Just doing bits.
That's really fun.
So,
aw, you just want to be like your dad. That's so cute.
I did, but my brother took comedy to a whole different place, and he taught me. You know, my brother was a fan of the arts, music, and comedy in particular, and writing, creative writing, and so he introduced me to, you know, the greats.
Mm-hmm. No one did. I never, like, that's just it. Everybody likes comedy. Like, they had all of that sort of early comedy education, and I didn't at all.
I'm sure we've talked about this before, but let me ask you one more question. It's the cheesiest question, but I definitely want to know your answer to it. Who do you have comedy heroes from who did you love when you were younger? Because we should not throw around heroes because they might now be rapists and murderers.
Sure, yeah. No, I didn't though. I just didn't. I didn't know comedy. Like, no one in my world like watched stand up of any sort. So I never encountered it until I was, you know, a legal adult, basically.
Wow.
Going out into the world. So, and I never stayed up really for Saturday Night Live or anything. I think like around high school, some people got into The State. And so I'd watch that occasionally. And then really one of the first things I mean, this is like a very, very clear memory. I was definitely a senior in high school. And there was a guy that like we were kind of flirting, kind of liked him. He was like a guitar player. It was very like, teenage, like, it was awesome.
Hate guitar players.
No, it's actually he was a bass player. Does that make it better?
It's a little better. He's not quite as talented, but it's like the worst. Like I would feel pretty confident in a social situation, or maybe I'm talking to a woman, I've got her on the hook, and then an old guitar guy comes over, and I'm like, well, I can't beat it. I can't beat him. Can't beat guitar guy. It can't be done.
And it's like a cheesy stereotype, but at the same time, you're right. It can't be done.
100% accurate. It's not a stereotype. It's a truth. He cannot be beaten.
I mean, girls make fun of it too. Like, oh my God, the like guitar guy. But at the same time, yeah,
they make fun of it all the way back to his hostel in Switzerland. What? Sorry.
Wow, you were there that night?
What?
Oh my God, I didn't see you. I was just staring at the guitar guy. No. So he like came over to my house, and we were down in my basement, and he like brought over VHS tapes to watch. And like, obviously this was just like, oh, I'm going to like bring over tapes and we're going to make out, right? Like that was the point of this. Everyone knows that that's the point of this, except that what he brought over was Mystery Science Theater 3000, which I had never seen before. And I was just like, all right, you stop, shush, I'm watching, shut, stop. Like that was the whole night.
That's
it was
great.
Like, okay, you got another, put it in. And I mean, like he kept like trying to put his arm around me. I'm like, stop touching me. I'm listening. This is amazing. So that was, I remember.
Well, that probably was one. I don't know where you're at with boys at that point, but it's probably one of those ones where you like found something more to like about a boy than the obvious in terms of that.
Who cared about him? He just happened to have the tapes. I don't know. He was just like a conduit. I did not. I in no way connected.
I thought I was going deep. I'm desperate for my girls to like meet a guy who has got a lot of different layers. And I'm sure they both have, and I don't maybe know necessarily every detail, but I just want to see, what's behind door number 2 or 3 with this fella.
Yeah. No, I probably should have, let that reflect well on him, but I didn't. I just was fully like parasitic here. I just like sucked away the thing that I liked and then discarded the rest.
You both really missed an opportunity there. So let me ask you about another thing, a random pivot now, going to your Twitter feed, which I love so much. What happened to you the other day? You tweeted about this. You were walking out of a store and you were feeling that maybe you were feeling confident because it seemed that maybe people were noticing your beauty, and you are an attractive lady. So you deserve that. It wouldn't be, but everybody likes a look, I suppose, or maybe it gets too far. I'll shut up.
Well,
I just realized I was going into like catcalling land. Like maybe you don't like it. Maybe you don't like being looked at.
The behind the tweet here is that I did not walk through a store. It was just easier to put in a tweet that it was out of a store. I was walking through a neighborhood, and in fact, got like I did get catcalled through a suburban central Pennsylvania neighborhood, and then also got like stared at, and like a dude like put his head out the window to look at me. It was very weird because it's not like.
What was the cat call?
It was just like a whistle, basically. Real basic one, real like old school,
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, what I got like, and I started to like, because at first I had like a moment of like, oh, how dare you, like of like momentary offense, and then kind of just like, yeah, all right, cool, yeah, I guess I'm how hot I must be, and then until later, and I just kind of like went to brush down my dress, only to realize that okay, it is tucked into my underwear and has been for the entirety of this walk. So that staring was maybe not all just overwhelmed by my beauty. Maybe just is that lady's dress? Like there's probably a lot more of the questioning.
Your dress was tucked into your underwear?
Yes, it was, sir. Yes.
So your leg was fully out, is what we're.
Well, yeah. I mean, like,
but more importantly,
was fine. It's more that like
that it's
happened.
It
wasn't like sexy panties. It's like it was just like beige under, like it was not a hot section.
It's just the idea that you did it, that you don't, that everybody else knew a thing about you that you didn't, and that thing was that your dress was tucked into your underwear, and that and you mistook it maybe, and then you thought, well, maybe they weren't attracted.
I felt good about myself for a half second. I was just like, all right, I'm yeah, sure, yeah, okay.
Now you're doing it on purpose. Now you're tucking it in. You're like, you know what? I need a little attention.
Yeah.
There are better ways, Maura. There are better ways.
Tell me them. What do you got?
I don't have them. I can't. I'm trying to think of when something like that has happened to me recently, but I don't.
That's not really like a dude thing. What do you have? Like your fly being down? Like what do you?
Oh yeah, sure. That happens to me a lot, but
that seems like nothing. Like who's?
It's not nothing when the kids were younger. That's
why.
Because like kids are like walking around and people. I don't know. I'm always.
Oh, they're like right at fly.
They're right at fly level,
gotcha,
and you always think the parents.
Did you accidentally whack a kid with your dong?
One time. No? But you started that. No, I mean I just don't think there's a. I don't ever think that anybody's, and I'm not putting myself down. I think I'm in pretty good shape, and pretty good looking guy for my age, etc. Whatever. I think I'm maybe a strong 6 with a hat. I'm a 7. But point is. Nice. And we need to determine what I am with a mustache because apparently some people think it's amazing and other people think
it's fantastic. I've seen the picture. It's great.
Yeah, most people don't. A lot of people agree with you, but most people don't. And so,
if I was your daughter, I'd be like, "This is embarrassing. Get rid of it immediately."
Well, those are the two people.
I think it's really funny.
Those are the two people. I sent a picture of them with the mustache while they were in Italy, and they said it better be gone when we get back. But I'm saying. I don't think certainly guys of a certain age, don't get any looks or whistles or cat calls. I don't think that happens. I don't believe it happens.
I mean, I think
any
in general,
culture,
women are less likely to cat call than men. I think in general, that is societally true right now. But at the same time, no, like you're, whatever number you are on the scale, it's higher than me. And you're far more likely to get looks. I'm sure you just don't notice it. That's just I think because you're just oblivious to it.
Well, that and I don't go out.
So all the looks are coming from the mirror.
No, it's like whatever's outside the shed and whoever I might pass in my own home. Yeah.
There's some ground dogs that have eyed you. Come on, you know it.
Well, I've definitely been eyeing them and I want them dead very, very badly.
That's a different kind of eyeing. Yeah.
I want to murder them in front of their offspring. My garden has been ravished. Mostly by the heat. How are you beating the heat, Maura? Are you an air conditioning person? Are you a fan person? And how does it affect you? And do you ever think about the future of the planet when it gets hot like this?
The heat does not necessarily make me think about the future of the planet. No, yep. I'm. That's a constant. Like, oh yeah, no, the planet is not doing well, at least not in terms of what humanity needs. And it's only going to get worse. But, the heat is just a minor part of it. I am both an air conditioning and a fan person. I also just fucking hate heat. Like,
you do.
I know for a fact if I lived in the South where there was, really high humidity and really a ton of heat, I would be in jail for murdering someone because there's something about it that like ratchets up my rage. And I'm not sure what that is, but I would have gone on a spree, man. It would be bad.
The heat makes you angry.
Very angry, yes.
And could you give us an example? Do you want to confess to heat? Do you know of a moment when heat induced anger? Because...
the worst I can think of it was actually once when I was in Savannah, visiting Savannah, and I was like on a tour. And I mean, it was just... There's nothing to point to other than the moments when you can just feel your rage like rising over things that your mind knows is like not a big deal. It's and the proportion starts to get really way off, like the person 3 feet ahead of you didn't hold the door open and suddenly it's just like, who has a knife? Like this person needs to die. I mean, and it's like, it's not even, you can see the rational point in your head. You're like, you can see it, but it's like you're leaving it behind on the highway. It's like getting smaller and smaller and you're just growing towards like, no, this makes sense. I should murder this person with a knife. Like that's obviously what needs to happen here. Right. And the part of you that's going, this is an overreaction just starts to like fade into nothing.
Well, I do think that there's like, scholarly research on how violent crime spikes in times of extreme heat temperatures, especially. I feel like that's a thing.
That sounds real.
Yeah.
I believe you.
Would you ever get so kinky that you would do fan AC together? Because I did last night.
It's happening right now.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the fan is on me.
You're being double teamed.
But like the moment you start, you're like kinky and fan. I'm like, did this take a turn? What's happening here? Yeah. Yes, I'm being double teamed by cold, and I love every second. I want it all over me.
Oh, oscillate that fan. That's where I'm at in my life. Like, I really think a lot about how I want to feel in this temperature. That also just with sleep, like prime sleep temperature, blanket, sitch. It's important.
Oh, I mean, that's just it. I like being cold all the time, which is a problem when it's hot out. Like, I like sleeping in the cold. But here's what's going to happen the moment we're done recording. Because right now I have like a fan that's set up on a shelf that's blowing at me, and I'm inside in the AC. But the moment this is over, I am also turning on the ceiling fan. So I will have 2 fans going to town on me.
Oh, now you're talking, lady. You're having worked. Okay, let's get serious now and talk about you work at the Americans for Tax Fairness Organization. You are with their campaign chief or something is your official title, which I should know. And
director.
Campaign director. There you go. And you guys are trying to publicize this point and have a campaign out right now about how the nation's wealthiest folks translate economic power into political clout. Billionaires buying elections, where here's one stat: nearly half of the funding for 2 Republican congressional super PACs so far this election cycle have come from just 27 billionaires. The GOP's tax cuts for the rich and corporations are paying off for them. And here's another: nearly half the funding for the 2 GOP congressional super PACs so far this election has, well, it's the same thing, that stat. I thought I have another stat. Anyway, you can take it from here. What is, how insidious is this? I feel like certainly things have changed in terms of money's influence, because I almost feel like now Republicans have gone so crazy, even if the gun companies weren't paying them off, they would still not legislate against any, because it's such a great thing to say.
Yeah, it has gotten really crazy. Basically, since the Citizens United decision, which I think was 2010, it has just opened the door for the wealthiest to be spending huge, huge amounts in our election. And what we keep finding is that they're doing so in these exponentially greater ways each election. And on the Republican, like on both sides, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's billionaires on the Democrat side too, but the Republican side is really much more. It's like, I want to say almost double than what the Democratic billionaires are buying. But we're at a place now where we have billionaires just full on purchasing candidates. I mean, you look at the Ohio race. J.D. Vance is running there. J.D. Vance is just Peter Thiel's, little toy that he's moving around, basically. Like, Peter Thiel just has a couple of toys out there on this game map of our country, and he's just like, oh, I'm racing them. This is fun. And then they get to do what I tell them to do. Like, it's just a game for them.
Sheldon Adelson with Gingrich or Santorum back in the day. I mean, you could go back, and I'm sure you can do this better than I can, talk about even one funder per one candidate, like you just did with Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance, with several different people. It's crazy.
And I mean, J.D. Vance isn't Peter Thiel's only candidate. He's, I think, running Blake Masters, I want to say, in Arizona. I'm not entirely sure, but he's got a couple of others too, and he's giving to massive super PACs. And then here in Pennsylvania, where I am, we have our richest person in Pennsylvania is a guy named Jeffrey Yass. He's spreading money all around. And for him, he, as just an example, he is a one issue guy. His issue is he wants to privatize schools. That's it. He wants to defund public schools and he wants to privatize them. And so he is willing to put money into any candidate who is willing to take that as a position and potentially enact those sort of laws, which is deeply, deeply troubling. We get rid of public schools, we have a lot of big, big problems. This is not necessarily the best way to go for our country, not if we want to actually offer opportunity to everyone, which, is one of those goals that people pretend they at least want to have in this country. But when you have billionaires who are able to just say, well, here's what I care about, and I'm just going to pay for politicians to enact the laws for the things I care about, we stop having a democracy, basically. I mean, or even a democratic republic. We just wind up in an oligarchical situation. We just have the rich purchasing our political system. It's no good.
Been going on for a really long time. It's hard to know where we're at. in on this issue. It's just it matters. It's behind everything from climate to guns to abortion, and you've been covering it for a long time. And I just feel like it's the most important policy issue. Tax policy really is the solution, and we could talk about public, financing of campaigns and other solutions for elections and so on. But it just feels like it doesn't get enough attention. And you working inside and on this issue every day, how do you feel about media paying attention to the issue that you literally spend your days working on? And much less Congress passing legislation on it or something, in terms of attention they pay on it.
Yeah, it is frustrating. I definitely think there could be a lot more uptake. But I think what's even more frustrating is not just how little attention the media pays, but rather what they do elevate instead. So the media puts a ton of focus on elevating billionaires and elevating CEOs and kind of giving them these really outsized megaphones so that they can say whatever they think. And we're supposed to find that really important without giving an equal amount of attention to how they're using this sort of power and wealth. And that's where it gets pretty frustrating, of course. Now, it's very difficult right now. There are so many terrible things going on, but I do think that the funding of all of it is one of those key underlying things that matters.
Yeah, there's two things that matter the most, it would seem: access to voting and money's influence on campaigns. And if you don't have some order, some moderation, and a lot of rules around those two things, then what do you have? And we've lost a lot of ground on those two things. Doesn't matter whatever issue.
And it's getting worse and worse.
Yeah. Oh, great.
Yeah, no big deal. I mean, it's 1,000,000 degrees, and we have lost our country completely in terms of it being a democracy. Not a big deal.
That's why I'm so glad we talked about the other stuff that we talked about at first today, because I always like talking with you about pretty much anything. And so that was good and fun. So I'll let you go and enjoy the rest of your hot Sunday, Maura. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to see what else I can tuck into my underwear. Have a good day, Pete.
Probably a weapon, so you can kill somebody.
All right, there she goes, Maura Quint. Maura Quint at Behind Your Back on Twitter. Wasn't it great? We went all over the place. I hope you appreciated it. I always love our conversations and our friendship and sharing it all with you. Hopefully you take something away from it. And go follow her. Go let her know you heard her here on the show. Now, time for a new guest, someone I've never had on the program before. He is a relative through marriage to the great Pete Coe, who's off in Scandinavia hunting or trying to be a Viking. I'm not sure. We'll get another dispatch from him this week. But Dexter Tiff Roberts is his brother-in-law, and he's also happens to be an award-winning writer and speaker. He's lived and worked in China for 30 years, just the type of expert I wanted to talk to. But first, let me ask you, what's one of the greatest feelings as an entrepreneur? You say, what is it? Well, it's when you start building a team with people who care just as much about the dream as you do, and they have the skills to make it happen. And if you want to find those people faster, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, Indeed's a powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all. Find great talent faster through time-saving skills like Indeed Instant Match, assessment, and virtual interviews. And with Instant Match, over 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their exact job description the moment they sponsor a job, according to Indeed data. One of the things I love about Indeed is that listeners are using it and that it's working. No other job site takes care of you like Indeed, because with Indeed, you only have to pay if an applicant meets your must-have requirements. Even better, Indeed's the only job site where you only pay for applications that meet. Indeed is an unbelievably powerful hiring partner, delivering 4 times more hires than all other job sites combined. Join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And you know what? In this minute I've been talking to you, 16 hires were made on Indeed, according to their data. When you sponsor an Indeed post, you're 3 times more likely to get a hire. The right candidate is doing everything they can to find you So if you use Indeed, you can be sure to do everything you can to find them too. Finding great talent does not have to be a second job. You can hire faster and better with Indeed, the #1 source of hires in the U.S. And Indeed is doing something no other job site has done. Now with Indeed, businesses only pay for quality applications matching the sponsored job description. Visit Indeed.com/standup to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/standup. Indeed.com/standup. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. All right, now with that done, it's time to get to my second guest on today's show. He is an award-winning writer, journalist, speaker, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Asia Security Initiative. He's an adjunct professor at the University of Montana, where he now lives after 30 years of writing and working and reporting from China, from Asia, where he visited every province, over 30 of them. And he's written this new book that we were talking about, The Myth of Chinese Capitalism, the Worker, the Factory, and the Future of the World. Ladies and gentlemen, he is on Twitter at Tiff Roberts. Check out his Substack, dexter.substack.com. Let's do it.
All right, here he is now, Dexter Roberts, although I guess some of your friends call you Tiff, is that right?
That's right. Tiff is my middle name, and I can go either Dexter or Tiff is great.
Has that show, the Dexter show, ruined your life, where Dexter's he's a murderer, right?
Yeah, believe it or not, I've never seen the show, but yeah, I wouldn't say it's ruined my life, but it always comes up. So certainly a more famous namesake, or the most famous namesake that I have.
So Tiff it is then.
Okay.
So I'm really fascinated with your work and your book, and I'm so happy to get to talk to you. I just only hope I can ask good enough questions for you to answer, because boy, you have had quite a career. I think you first moved to Beijing in 1995, but obviously you were interested in China before that. So, I guess my question is, why did you want to why'd you get interested in China and spend a career there?
Yeah, well, I'm always asked that question, and for obvious reasons. I mean, I grew up in Montana, where I am now, which I've returned to after 25 years or so in China. And there wasn't much of a Chinese community here. There wasn't a lot going on. My father, actually, I would credit him for the original interest. He was very interested in Buddhism, Zen Buddhism at one point, Tibetan Buddhism later. And so when I grew up, we actually always had Chinese, Japanese art in the house. At one point we had a Zendo, and people from the community would come sit zazen in our house. It was a beautiful room with polished floors and mats to sit on, and art on the walls, including Chinese art. My father gave me a book of Chinese philosophy in high school, and I found it fascinating. So I ended up going out to college in California, had that interest, and thought both about studying the then Soviet Union, dating me, that still existed back then, or China. I was interested in a country with a revolution as well. So I ended up studying China, and that was that.
Interested in a country that had a revolution, but why not your own?
Well, the other part of it was I wanted to study somewhere. Perhaps growing up in Montana, I was particularly interested in the rest of the world. So I wanted to study a place that was very, very different from the U.S. Chinese met the bill with Chinese characters. I was fascinated by the writing system. I still am. The character system and culture and a history so different. So yeah, I was looking for a revolution, but not the one in the backyard here in the United States.
Let me just ask you. I was going to get to that at some point. I mean, I was thinking about this today. I'm walking my dog, and I'm thinking about you and your life and your career, because I was planning to interview you, and I'm like, if an American reporter or any reporter goes and lives and reports on another country, they must enjoy it. Like, if they go for that long, they must enjoy all different parts of it. What is it about culture, anything that you just mentioned, history, any of it that, I'm assuming now that you like living there, that you enjoyed it all?
Yeah, I absolutely did. And I think, just quickly, first, I would say you really, in Beijing, where I was based, you'd find two kinds of journalists. Those that were career journalists that were rotating from world capital, and would come through China for 3 to 5 years or something, wouldn't have a previous background. The other group, which I was part of, was people that actually came to their interest in China first.
Right.
And tried to figure out, okay, what can I do what kind of a profession, how can I earn money that will allow me to continue to live in China and work in China. And journalism was something that I came upon, and a bunch of other friends as well, who were those, again, that their interest in China really preceded their journalism. So that's those are the two kinds of journalists you would find there, you still find there. I mean, being a journalist, first of all, have always loved simply because it's, in some ways, being like a lifetime student. You choose a topic that you're interested in, you know this well, and you get to talk to the smartest people that know a lot more about it than you, and then write about it. And then you go, or whatever, broadcast about it, whatever you do, whatever your medium is. And then you go ahead and do that again and again and again. And I really found that being a journalism, I found absolutely fascinating. China, again, the long history that is absolutely different, the dynastic history, the culture, Chinese philosophy, as I said, I had an interest in. And then the communist revolution, the 20th century communist revolution, which I found fascinating. So all those things sort of together really added up to this interest I had.
America is so intertwined with China now, and most of us have no idea about anything to do with China, except a few different myths and ideas and concepts and generalizations and maybe menu items, which apparently are not at all Chinese. Turns out they've been bastardized just like everything else we do here. But your reporting seems to have mostly been focused on the economy of China, its growth, and the time that you started covering it and first went there. Was that right? 1995? Was that your first gig, Businessweek?
That's right. Yep. I started.
Wow.
I actually started freelancing for them initially in Beijing, and then it became eventually, because of the demand for China news, it eventually became a full-time job.
What's most fascinating, I think, about your work and about the book is just the kind of conversation about the rural versus urban economy. And we can talk about culture and everything else and economics, but there's a lot of similarities, it would seem, to some extent around the world when it comes to a certain type of economic growth or disaster. If I looked at the timeline, and I did, of China's economy over the past 70 years, I felt like that gives us a good perspective where we can start to talk about your book. But it also, I understand why the timeline might start with China's entry into the WTO, which, of course, you covered as a journalist. But where do we start in terms of the book and talking about China's economy and obviously why it matters to Americans?
Yeah, well, I mean, you hit a good key milestone in China's sort of the development of what its modern economy today, which was its entry to the World Trade Organization in 2001. Earlier than that, and I write about earlier periods in my book as well. You have from 79, you have Deng Xiaoping, they call the paramount leader, launching what so-called reform and opening, and really starting to open China to the world. That was really the moment where there was this clear, pronounced break with the previous Mao Zedong era, and a completely different economy back then, a state-planned one with the communes in the countryside and the big state enterprises in the city. So that's another key date, which I also talk about. But as you saw read in my book, one of the things I do look at is how what I call legacy policies from the Mao era, from many years ago, still define the lives of many people, and particularly the rural Chinese of China today. So I'm not giving you a straight answer, but I think, again, 2001, China's entry to the World Trade Organization is a key moment. But again, policies from before that still today are hanging around in good ways and bad ways, and defining the lives of the people of China.
You cover specifically the economic growth, which is undeniable, right? Like, no one's arguing about economic growth in China and you can talk about a time frame, whatever you want. But specifically, you talk about the growth also of the wealth gap, which I think is such an interesting and important issue for all of us to try to understand, that the wealth gap that exists in China or any other country, society, or economy now or ever is worth discussing why it exists, because it's man-made, is my understanding, Tiff. So talk to me about the economic growth first. Undeniable, GDP, statistics, what do we got?
Yeah. So as a business journalist in China in my previous incarnation, one of the things you always struggle with is the veracity or the accuracy of the statistics.
Yes.
And it's a well-known fact that China, the government in Beijing does play around, smooths the troughs and the peaks of economic growth. They like a prettier, more regularized timeline when it comes to economic growth. So that's happening. But absolutely, there has been this undeniable, tremendous economic growth in China. Some people used to call it the Chinese economic miracle. We've seen overall in the country, China, move from being, when I arrived there in the mid 90s, from being somewhere in the bottom of the top 10 countries by size of economy in the world to today, where it's number 2. And according to at least some analyst predictions, en route to become the world's largest economy, replacing the U.S. At the same time, with living standards, you've seen a tremendous growth in living standards and all that undeniable. What you bring up, which is something I do talk about a lot in the book, though, is even though we do see all this progress in living standards, we're also seeing a surging growth in income and wealth inequality. And that's very much defines the lives of people, of course, in China today. There's a lot of very poor people still, but also it's a huge issue for China's future economic growth. The wealth gap, the income gap is actually, and I argue this in the book, a real obstacle to the continued rapid growth of China going forward.
Yeah, it's really important to talk to a reporter, a journalist like yourself, who knows all the nuance and who's documented it so well before we hear certainly politicians, much less pundits, talking about so much about trade and the Chinese economy and the conflict, all of it. You've covered it all. And I think what's beautiful in your new book is you cover it. Your style is to actually introduce us to real people. And that, I think, is a wonderful thing to do and way to write. Talk to me a little bit about that style before we maybe hopefully get into a couple of the people who you profiled, which I think are representative of the trends that you're also documenting, the economic issues, the cultural issues as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the great things about being a reporter is to my mind, is the opportunity to talk to regular people. So I made a point going, back from the first years that I arrived in China, of trying to go out. First of all, I was based in Beijing, but trying to travel a lot into the hinterlands of the country and visit with Chinese farmers. And then, as I focus so much on in my book, with these Chinese migrants who come from rural China, but have left the farm and come to the cities mainly to work in factories and on construction sites. So as you read in the book, I go repeatedly back to a village in one of the poorest provinces in China, which is Guizhou, and a place where most of the young people have cleared out because they can't really make a living there. And it's mainly elderly people still working the land, and then young people off in the factories and the construction sites, particularly in the earlier years, more and more now in service jobs, not very good service jobs, but like motorcycle delivery workers that zoom around the cities and help the big cities function in China, but a long hours, dangerous job, and very poorly paid often. So those young people mainly having left these villages. But anyway, yeah, so I spent a lot of time out in the hinterlands. I also made a vow to myself after being in China for a couple decades that I wasn't going to leave until I visited every province and region. And there are 30 some provinces and regions in China. And so I went ahead and did that as well. And I always felt like, the reality is that the migrants and rural people of China make up about half the population. And right. I think too much journalism is really focused on the cities. And it gives you a very incomplete picture of where China is today. That's where the wealth is. That's where the beautiful high rises are. That's where the fancy subway systems and so on, nice airports are. But that's not what the countryside looks like.
Just one question I've been really wanted to ask you, and I'm not sure if you cover this in the book or not, or I'm sure you write about it at your Substack, which is linked and people should subscribe to. But how much is climate change a factor in the consciousness of rural farmers or urban dwellers, anybody in China? Is that an issue that they think a lot about? Because obviously we've heard about how bad the pollution it has gotten. And, Americans know they shut down factories and manufacturing, I guess, during the Olympics, for whatever that image it creates. But I always kind of want to know about how that plays out. Since you've been to every province, which I think is just amazing and crazy, what is the perspective on that issue, if any?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you go to Beijing, the leadership has been very focused on basically taking a leading global role in dealing with climate change. President, Party Secretary Xi Jinping has made it very much part of his goal of becoming what he sees as an international leader, giving China a large role in trying to deal with climate change and reduce emissions. They've had limited success. They've done things that have been very good that have reduced emissions. For example, they've cut down on some of the most dirty coal polluting plants in the country. At the same time, you look more closely and you'll see that in some cases they've taken that dirty technology and they're selling it in to countries that neighbor them, like Pakistan. So there's some questions about how much success there has actually been. If you go to the countryside, it isn't something that people immediately bring up or necessarily are really knowledgeable about. Having said that, it definitely is affecting them. We've seen more extreme floods in parts of China related to climate change. We've seen right now China's going through a heat wave with over 70 cities with record-breaking high temperatures. So people feel the climate changing. It's affecting their lives, affecting what they can grow to a degree. As you mentioned earlier, creating pollution, creating new inversion issues with the pollution and so on. But again, not something that people talk about a lot in the hinterlands of China.
So let's get back then. Well, before I get specifically back to the book, and if you cover this, forgive me again, I haven't finished it, but it's really fascinating and interesting and super important. What about the issues that took place with trade between the Trump administration and the Chinese counterparts at the time and now? I just wonder if you would say, if you wrote about that, forgive me, but I really am fascinated in how much of a change that had on our economy, their economy, winners and losers.
Yeah. Well, I think the verdict for people that are not just playing politics and trying to see what they want to see is that it's probably had the trade wars specifically in tariffs has at least had as equal pain for us as it has for people in China. And China also, the trade war, to a degree, the end of the trade war coincided with the global pandemic. And China actually, because of some of the things they make, like PPE and electronic devices that are good if you want to do Zoom calls or work from home, they actually saw some very strong trade export numbers during at least the first part of the pandemic. So I would say about that chapter, which is not over by any means. Right. The Biden administration hasn't lifted a lot of the tariffs, and we hear different reports about what they plan to do going forward. But I would say that the decision to I think there was an overdue reckoning with the trade relationship with China that the U.S. needed to wake up to. And I think that the Trump administration, which I am no fan of whatsoever, deserves some credit for sort of saying, look, this relationship is broken. China's mercantilist practices in trade and investment are hurting our economy in some ways, some of our industries, and we need to confront that. The tool that was used with tariffs slapped across so many products out of China, I don't think actually worked very well at all. There have been other efforts like sanctions on some of China's big tech companies like Huawei, which actually have been fairly effective in if the U.S. goal is to hurt those companies, that is actually that goal has been achieved. So, but again, the trade war is unresolved. I think it hurt us Americans just as much, if not more, than it hurt Chinese. But again, in part of an overdue reckoning of the sort of the unequal nature of the U.S.-China relationship.
God, it's so complicated. I think you did a great job. I feel like what I heard about the relationship, whether it was Republicans or Democrats, anybody can create whatever narrative, but there's really never a lot of good answers for American politicians, because you're going to have to make tough choices where certain constituencies whose support you need to win elections are going to be damaged. Steel workers, and manufacturers at some point. Then they've got the currency manipulation issue, and there's just a lot of leverage that China, of course, has, and that's very hard to explain in a soundbite. But Trump does one of the hard things to some extent, because he realizes his supporters don't give a shit if he punches them in the face. At least that's the way I characterize it. It's not going to hurt him, and I'm not sure if it does or not. But okay, so let's get back to the book. I mean, I'm fascinated by just the idea that it seems, and all the generalizations, and you can bust these myths however you want, that China makes everything. Everything we have is made in China. How much truth is there in terms of hard goods and products that they manufacture? And take us inside a Chinese factory, because you write all about this, and it's so important and really, really interesting.
Yeah, well, I think sometimes if you go into a Walmart or a Target, you can start to feel like everything indeed is made in China. And the reality is, particularly after China entered back to this date when China entered the World Trade Organization in 2001. The reality is we did see a huge movement of global manufacturing into China, mainly taking advantage of what were then very cheap wages of these migrant workers, and also a wonderful infrastructure system that China put in place to support that factory environment. So, as I write about in the book, for years we talked about China being factory to the world. And that, again, reflects the fact that so much of the global products that we use are being made in China. Jump forward till today, and actually we're seeing something very different. We're seeing a lot of lower end manufacturing, and this has been going on for a number of years, leaving China, in part because wages have come up pretty dramatically, even though there's still this great inequality in China. So you've got a situation where, for example, your average manufacturing wage in Mexico, which of course is on the U.S. border, which is convenient if we're trying to ship the goods to the U.S., or if companies are trying to ship the goods to the U.S., are actually lower than average manufacturing wages in China now. So we've seen this actually dramatic shift, which has far-reaching implications in multiple ways, of factories starting to move out of China. Places like Mexico have been the beneficiaries. The real beneficiaries has been the neighboring countries in Southeast Asia, places like Vietnam.
Really important, very interesting. You talked to take me inside, when any specific factory. You reported for years and for the book right from the floor. I mean, we can talk about anything from labor practices. Again, people hear things about Chinese factories, and it's hard to know what's true. And if there's anything way to ever generalize about a Chinese factory or use the word typical Chinese factory, because it's such a large country with such diverse manufacturing base. But, you illustrate it so well in the book. Take us in there with you.
Yeah. So, when I first started going into factories in the mid-90s in China, you had a lot of what we would consider a sweatshop environment and real abuse of the workers. Back then, in some cases, they were almost prisoners of the factory because they're migrants to the city. They had a real shaky status there in urban China, and the factory owners could take their ID documents and they could get tossed in a local jail for being out in the street. So there was real abuse and really a lot of sweatshops in China. You'd go into a dormitory room, you'd have maybe 12 workers in one room, 6 bunks, a communal bathroom that was shared by the whole floor by dozens and dozens of not 100 workers. No air conditioning, so you'd see the worker that would have the prize fan that would be turned, set on lock, so it would just blow on his bunk bed. And then, not very good. They eat in cafeterias and so on. Keep in mind, again, these workers are from all over China. Often they speak actually different dialects of Chinese. They may not even speak standard Mandarin Chinese, which is mainly spoken up in Beijing. But it's the national language. But these people, migrant workers who might not be as well educated as well, usually would not necessarily even speak the standard dialect that well or Mandarin that well. So that was sort of what you saw then. And there are still sweatshops today. There's no doubt about it. But as I mentioned earlier, the bigger picture has been, after all this money and investment and factories flooded in, more and more workers came from the countryside, throw in the one-child policy, which created the situation with an aging population and an aging workforce. And actually now, after many, many years, a shrinking workforce. And wages have gone up and things have changed. China's moved decisively to try to automate its factories. So again, it's such a big country. You can still find the sweatshops. You can still find workers that are being abused, sadly. But you've also more and more have these automated factories, fewer workers, and producing higher end goods, not producing the cheap shoes and toys and textiles that China was known for so many years.
It's interesting how if you don't pay that close attention, even as a consumer, you just assume certain things are generally manufactured there. And those ideas get stuck with you and you carry them on, and you might even make an argument or try to make a smart point about it when, in fact, that's actually not necessarily the case anymore because so much has changed there. Talk to me about what it means, what it looks like to be a migrant worker. And if you want to introduce us to one of the people that you covered, I mean, the issue was you couldn't get work. Young people couldn't get work in rural areas, so they had to go to the factories, et cetera, in urban centers. But I guess, what does migrancy look like in China?
Yeah, well, so again, dial back to the 90s when I first started going to some of these places and first met some of the migrant workers. In 2000, I guess, is when I first met some of the migrant workers that I became friends with and write about in my book. Then again, the only option was to leave the village, where it was basically subsistence agriculture, usually drop out. Virtually none of them would actually finish high school. They would drop out. School's not that good in the countryside anyway. And they need to make some money for their family. And there, you picture this with WTO entry, there's a surge of money and investment going into the coastal areas. American investors, investors from all over the world, a lot of Hong Kong and Taiwanese, ethnic Chinese investors as well. And they need cheap workers. So there's this flood of young people going to the coast. And you see things happen like the ugly things happen, like the sweatshop I just described. But you also see young workers or young people that become these migrant workers actually making more money than they ever dreamed of, sending a lot of it back home. So that's sort of the bigger picture. What we've seen in recent years, which I just alluded to with the automation in the factories and the aging workforce, is there are fewer and fewer jobs in these coastal factories. There's been a big switch amongst the migrants into service sector jobs, as I mentioned earlier, not well paid. A lot of them, again, one of the most common is, as I mentioned earlier as well, are these migrant workers who drive these motorcycles at crazy speeds around the cities to deliver hot food or whatever it is, whatever an white-collar urbanite worker wants, they can get it on their doorstep within, less than 30 minutes for very cheap. Those workers are paid very badly. So there's been this transition in the jobs they do. At the same time, there's less opportunities in the coastal area. So some of them have actually started to go home to the countryside. One of the big, I'll just finish with this thought. One of the big unanswered questions for China is, for all those workers, and there's 300 million migrant workers still. Wow. For all those ones that are returning to the countryside. So we're talking close to the, not too much, it's an enormous population. What are they going to do? It's not clear that they're not going to go back and become farmers. It's not clear what they're going to do in the countryside. Many of the cities, and this is I find very ugly. In many cases, the cities are like, we needed you for the factories. We're automating. Low-end stuff is going overseas. We don't really need you. We want you to do the ugly service jobs that white-collar workers don't want to do. But that's a limited number of you migrants, and the rest of you should go home. What are they going to do in the countryside? We don't know at this point. China doesn't know.
So that starts to lead us, and maybe I did a bad interview style, but to the idea of the title of the book, the thesis, The Myth of Chinese Capitalism. People don't know how to talk about our own economy. People don't know how to argue about it. People don't understand economics in maybe their own home, their own state, much less country. But we do understand certain theories and philosophies about it. We're a capitalist country, and we've heard of other kind of economic ideas, some of us, socialism or communism. Economic theories have been practiced. But, China was a communist country, and then a lot changed. And I feel like the language describing Chinese economics is to some extent sometimes argued about, even with smart folks. So what is Chinese capitalism? Why is it a myth?
I mean, first of all, I would say that, with China, we're seeing a system that in many ways is unique. So it's hard to put a label on it other than, they call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. So
I'm sorry, Tiff. That's how they refer to their own in general. Socialism with Chinese characteristics. How they refer to their own economic theory, philosophy.
They do, yeah. And this goes back a way. But to the title of my book, "The Myth of Chinese Capitalism," I would say the myth I'm talking about. You can look. Part of it is the view of the rest of the world of China,
right.
and this idea, which I think is we have to being rapidly abandoned because it clearly no longer is true, is that that China would inevitably, as it opened up its economy and reformed, it was on sort of an inevitable path to more openness. The surge in living standards we saw for most Chinese people would continue indefinitely. And from the outside perspective, the big global multinationals of the world would continue to make huge amounts of money there. And, basically rural Chinese would become part of the middle class, and they would start buying, and it would be good for everyone. Well, what we've seen instead is that model is not proving true. First of all, China, particularly under its leader now, Xi Jinping, wants to have a much more controlling system for its economy. Some people call it state capitalism. That has implications, obviously, for the multinationals of the world who may find that there are Chinese rival companies being supported by the state that make it much harder to do business in China. The other big myth, again, as I said earlier, is this idea that China would have an ever larger middle class, living standards would keep going up. Well, as we talked about earlier, instead, we're seeing growing inequality. A lot of Chinese people are, to a degree, I would argue, are being left behind in the system. So for a bunch of reasons, these myths we had about this Chinese juggernaut opening up more and more to the world, more and more of an opportunity for the multinationals of the world, delivering more and more benefits and growth to the Chinese people has been proven untrue. So therefore a myth.
So many smart, credible, respected people, I'm sure even in your circles, got it wrong, didn't they?
Absolutely, yeah. We all did. I put myself in that category. There was this assumption for years that, the other part of the coin is that this idea that continued economic reform would lead to a political opening. And this idea that, as Starbucks flourish in China
right.
and people become wealthier, they're going to demand civil rights and the political system will start to change. And somehow it'll become more like what we think of as a liberal political system. Absolutely untrue. Not what we've seen at all.
So much to talk about that. So much more to talk about culture and everything else. But I wonder, I know that there's no way to simplify any of this, but I think that to some extent it would seem that a similar issue in Chinese economy and predictions about it, as well as America's and everybody else's, is that demographics have always been destiny to some extent when it comes to economics until you introduce robots and not people. You have a whole chapter about robots. Did automation, is that what changes everything for all economies and including in particularly China? Is that what was also somehow unpredictable? At some point it would seem they would be leading on the guaranteed universal basic income.
Yeah, well, I can talk more about China than what's happening globally, I think. But in China, there was a very conscious effort made by very intelligent people running the Chinese government and economy. They don't always make the right intelligent decisions necessarily, like everybody, but in any case, very smart people. And there was a conscious decision to try to avoid what they saw as the hollowing out of industry in other countries. Certainly it's happened in the U.S. They focused more looking at Japan as their neighbor. And they knew that there was this demographic. They saw the demographic writing on the wall. They knew that they would have fewer and fewer workers, and they decided they want to get ahead of that. So the government has actually put a lot of money into trying to fund and encourage the transition to more automated factories, encourage the growth of Chinese domestic robot makers. And again, there's this idea there's a plan behind it, and that's to have their own domestic robot industry, start to sell robots to the world, move a lot of their manufacturing over to automated factories instead of labor-intensive factories, and therefore continue to have a more advanced but a large manufacturing sector. So anyway, that's what they're doing in China, and in some ways they've been successful on their sort of indigenizing, if you will, or creating their own domestic robot companies. They've done it in part by making very large acquisitions of some other well-established global robot companies. They bought a company called KUKA out of Germany, which was one of Germany's top robot makers. Now it's Chinese, and so that's helped them leapfrog in.
So China's going to create their own robot army and then sell it to the rest of the world. Is that what you're saying?
That's their plan. That's their plan, and they've made progress on that.
Is that a military army or a labor army?
Well, the robots, it's very commercial. They want to sell robots to the factories of the world, and they have a very clear plan throughout different high tech sectors. They have a plan they've called Made in China 2025. They've updated it, which basically says in all these important core areas of modern advanced technology, we want to dominate. And they've set targets for local production. They want to stop buying advanced technology from the rest of the world.
So much more to ask you. Such a great book. I can't wait to talk again when I'm done with it and when these things come up. I do have to ask you one final question. This one comes from my father. He insists upon it. My dad has always said that we have been forever at war with China. He insists I ask you that. Can you find any way to agree with the language that the U.S. has been at war with China for 30 years?
I don't think China. I don't think they've been at war. So I'll respect to your father. I don't think they've been at war for all those years. I think that I think what we've seen is for many, many years, the reform and opening era of China has been defined by this recognition on the Chinese side that they need to have a closer relationship to get the investment, to get the managerial know-how, to get the technology from countries like the United States. And so they have felt that they need to actually have a pretty amiable relationship rather than a warlike relationship with the United States to get that, to help grow their own economy. Stepping back further, there's well beyond 30 years ago, there's a long, strong history of close ties between the United States and China. Some of it good, some of it bad. So I wouldn't say we've been at war. I do think that I did talk to earlier about the sort of overdue reckoning of the trade and economic relationship, and that we were basically, I think we were naive about how close we could become as friends. I do think it's important for us to realize that in many ways we are very direct competitors, and that competition is only going to become more heated. And there is a real risk of that competition spilling over into something much uglier, like a military conflict. And so we need to be aware of that. So I finish with that point.
Very well said, all of it. What an honor to get access to you and to talk to you and to fire all these questions. Such an important issue. The myth of Chinese capitalism, the worker, the factory, and the future of the world, as well as your Substack, which is really interesting. And now I can't find the name of your Substack. I'll put it in.
It's called Trade War.
That's right.
And I started it during the trade war we were just talking about. But it's actually a much broader look at the economic and business relationship between the U.S., the rest of the world, and also a real look at sort of what's happening inside China in its and all the challenges it faces in its economic development going forward.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. I'm learning a lot. You've had an amazing career and keeps going. I really appreciate you joining me today so much, Tiff. Really, really great to talk to you.
Well, thanks so much, Pete. I enjoyed the conversation.
How did I do? I felt, it's a tough subject, and I'm not that familiar with it. I sound like an idiot the whole time? I feel a little insecure.
Not at all. No, I thought that was good.
All right.
There's so much to cover always, and it's some of it, a lot of it's technical with the economics and stuff. I thought that went very well.
Okay, good. Thanks very much.
All right, there he goes, Dexter Tiff Roberts, the myth of Chinese capitalism, and what an interesting conversation. Joe, go check him out at D. Tiff Roberts. Let him know that you heard him here. Go get the book, The Myth of Chinese Capitalism, and check out his Substack as well, which is very interesting, Dexter.substack.com. As always, thank you to Maura Quint, who is so good every time. I love our conversations. I always laugh and learn a lot from her and from you. Can't do it without you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. Check out Indeed.com/standup if you need to hire someone new at your firm, at your company, and be the change that you want to see in the world. It feels really good, feels really right. Learn to meditate. Actually, you don't need to learn anything. Just sit and be quiet. Close your eyes for 20 minutes a day. Write, read, grow along with me each and every day. As John Carroll has, well, I grow along with him. How about that? Sing it to us, baby. John Carroll, Grammy award-winning singer-songwriter, and apparently I've issued him Oscars and Emmys and so many more awards as well. Here we go. Take it away. Talk to you tomorrow.
They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, to make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run.